All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fanfiction Tapes. I'm your host today, Maya, pronouns she, her, and I'm joined by.
Badger, pronouns he, him.
And as always, I'm our producer Ian. My pronouns are also he, him.
Today's episode is a podcast of our own, which is all about the comedic themes of satire and parody. And these are. Well, I guess to start us off, we need to define these. These are not actually uncommonly confused for each other, and the Google definitions don't really help with that much. Satire generally is making fun of someone or something through pointing out vices or flaws. Rich people, world leaders, and governments are all pretty common targets of satire. I believe Shakespeare is a really well known satire author. Parody, however, kind of more imitates personal work to be funny. If you're familiar with the Minecraft music videos such as TNT, Revenge, and Fallen Kingdom popular during the early 2010s, that's weird to say. Those are all pretty good examples of this. People can be parodied, but it'd be good to remember last week's episode about acceptable targets because it's real easy to get kind of spicy there.
Yeah, satire can get cruel.
Yes. I was actually parodied in high school. I didn't use my lockers much in high school, so I started using a backpack that would have better back support for me. And that meant that I had a external frame hiking bag on, because that was really the only thing I had that had any form of actual back support in terms of a bag. I was in scouting. And this made me stick out a lot. I was probably the only kid in a 4,000 kid school who had a external frame hiking bag. I was tall enough already, so I stuck out in the hallways like a sore thumb. And our junior year students would do plays. And of course, there was a kid who was excessively nerdy and had a hiking backpack on in every single play. Now, I found that funny as shit, but it's real easy for that to have seriously hurt me if things turned out a little bit differently. That's kind of an example of how you want to be careful with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also really, really easy to just keeping in the ruling of punching up and not down is sort of like the way to describe that. Like, it's better to take shots at people who are quote unquote above you sociologically than those who are quote unquote beneath you. And what I mean by that, not in terms of like a condescension way, but in terms of like a status way in the global scheme of things. Like, it is super cruel to target individuals of like coworkers, friends, like schoolmates. Like that sort of thing is like, it's really untread ground, and you have to be really, really sure to know that, you know, that would be okay. Meanwhile, like the president of the United States, like, you know, get the 2x4. Yeah, get the 2x4 out. Give it your best whack. So like, yeah, like it's so punch up, don't punch down is sort of like the best way of describing it. I've been doing parody and satire for the past 6 months, via increasingly unhinged tweets about fandom shipping, and it's like parodying a satirical take on fandom shipping, where it's just like, well, what if one of them was a fish and one of them was a fisherman? That sort of deal. And the other thing I would say about parody and satire is like the thing that I strive for when I make it is I don't want the laugh, a laugh. What I want is anger. Like, I want someone to be like frustrated at me for making this, and like in like a good wholesome way, where like the eye roll, like the scoff and the eye roll is the aim, because it's too stupid to be offensive. Like that's the whole thing. We're like, well, just like writing flowery language around one of them being a pilot, and doing like a parody of like a cheating arc when they flew another plane, you know, that sort of thing. And the joke is the absurdism, and that's the other thing that I've always found about satire too, is that like the more absurd you get, the more fun it is, in the sense that like A lot of comedy is like just adding absurdism to observation. Like a really, really good example of this, and this is one of my favorite like comedic bits of all time, is there's an episode of The Simpsons where Sideshow Bob walks out onto the front yard and steps on a rake, and then turns and steps on another rake, and then continues to step on rakes. And the first time he gets hit with the rake, it's funny, and then he gets progressively less funny the longer he walks and steps on rakes. And then suddenly him stepping on rakes and getting hit over and over again becomes the joke, and now it's funny again. Like it goes a full circle. And that's sort of something that just decided to become a parody of itself incredibly quickly. Like it's a 12-second turnaround where someone's just like, establish something, keep establishing it, and now we're making fun of ourselves for having established this. So parody can like come out of stuff incredibly quickly. Like it can really like any sort of established pattern can be parodied as long as you understand like the underpinnings of it, like what it's aiming at. Versus satire is just sort of like, it's by definition a little more cutting. Like it's satirical takedowns are a long tradition of like in society in general of just like, you know, political cartoons are famous satires. Yes. Where it's just like, this person is so stupid for this take or whatever. It doesn't always have to be this person is so stupid, but it does cut a little deeper. Parody is sort of the shape of something, in my opinion, and then satirizing is like the themes about it is what you're taking to make fun of, and both are incredibly effective.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Badger. Just last episode, we talked a lot about punching up and punching down. And as you're saying all this, I was thinking, man, maybe we should have asked you to be on the first episode instead of the second episode.
Well, I mean, acceptable targets is such an important thing to discuss because, like, all right, we'll just, like, we don't have to get into this now because it's not, like, the content of the episode. But just really briefly, I've been a native he/him, like white appearing cis dude in queer spaces for going on 10 years now. And one of the most important things to do as an exercise when you are someone who is in these spaces that, generally speaking, like white cis dudes in queer spaces are not the most welcome generally, for good reason, because sociologically and like a society was built for us as the white he/hims, right? So there's this group that's sort of trying to take that down and reshape it and remold it into something where everyone is a lot more equal. So it's always fun to be like coming into these spaces and being like having to figure out the boundaries really, really quickly, figuring out like, hey, how do I keep assuring people, like finding yourself having to keep assuring people that, yeah, no, I'm not gonna hurt you, which is like a thing that has been well established in queer communities of like, okay, this is an in club, and if you're gonna screw around in here, you can't stay here. You have to go. So that whole like don't screw around kind of mentality has always just been something I lived by. So acceptable targets is such a thing I'm passionate about because like the last thing I want to do as someone who likes to make jokes and parodies and stuff like that is hurt anyone who doesn't quote unquote deserve it, right? Like especially with like the target of a joke, because it is so fucking easy to hurt someone accidentally, not understand why, and because conflict is hard, and because people are too nervous sometimes to bring stuff up, you'll never know you hurt them, right? The large majority of the time, you'll never know you hurt them unless you seek it out and go like, "Hey, you've gone quiet. What's happening?" And a lot of people don't have the awareness to even do that. So establishing boundaries is something that's been like my calling card since I was like 22 now, like just kind of in like, hey, you know, boundaries are neutral good. They don't mean anything. It's important to set boundaries on anything in your life, and especially around topics that people can be sensitive to. It like mind your spoons and spoiling things for CW, and like all of that should be way more normal than it actually is. And it isn't you're not giving up a concession to do it. It's easy to do. Every platform has it in some way, shape, or form now. And you just allow people to opt into what you're doing. Anyway, yeah, so that's my little mini ramble. The opting in for what I'm doing in terms of like satire and parody. It's also like why I think a lot of people avoid them. Like avoid satire specifically because some folks just don't like how mean it can be, which is like the most valid take I've ever heard. Like if you're sitting in the hellhole of a crumbling capitalist society and you're like, all I want to do is like have fun, the last thing you want to do is sit there and listen to someone just being lambasted on YouTube. And like, I get it. Like that is that is a totally fine take to make. However, when it's a climate change denier, I do enjoy it a lot. So like there is a rotten part of me that's sort of like, yes, gladiators, give them both swords. But anyways, the point is,
add that to the list of acceptable targets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, the point is just like every single sociological structure, every single societal structure has a rhythm and movement and a breathing pattern, and you have to kind of get used to all those. And usually the only way you're going to find out who you can satirize, who you can parody, and it be funny and not cruel, is by spending time in those cultures, like in those, like we're talking queer culture, like native culture, whatever the culture may be. And which is what I think a lot of like bigwig studio execs and comedians, stand-up comedians especially, are horrible at this. They get it wrong because they don't have that nuanced understanding of just hanging out in queer spaces. Like if you are a lesbian and you make fun of lesbians, 90% of the time that's going to be really funny. If you are I don't know, Dave Chappelle, and you make fun of lesbians, that's going to go over like a lead balloon. And that's where the backpedaling starts of like, oh, well, they're sensitive. It's like, they're not sensitive, dude. Like you don't let them opt into your comedy. And also it's not that funny. And also it's like, you have no basis in that culture. So you don't get to talk like that. Shut up. Like, that's just, anyway. Yeah. So we are way off of the rails at this point. What are the nuances of each, Maya? Take us back into the minecart here.
Something that's really interesting for me, kind of a nuanced area of both satire and parody, and this is something that I grew up with, is my dad's a caricature artist. He does this for charities, just kind of something he does with his time. And people will pay to see themselves heavily satirized and parodized. Because kind of caricature art it's
ultimate opt-in.
Is extreme. You take these extreme features, you make them look wildly out of proportion, but you still have to keep them looking like the person. One of the things my dad does is he always makes the body smaller and the head massive, because it's easy to like play with that. Or if they've got kind of like weird ears or something, he does a lot is he'll like make the ears real big, and he's had to learn how to be careful with those lines over the years, because that's real easy to step into a sensitive space for someone.
Well, yeah, like even the process of like making the body small and the head huge is like, there are fewer people, in my estimation, this is just uneducated estimation, but like there are fewer people who have like head issues, like head body issues, than like weight issues, right? Like in terms of self-perception. So like there are people who are sensitive about their weight, and that's like a well-known societal problem that we all done been new about all that shit, right? Like how it's really, really unfair for bodies, women in particular. But like, so to immediately be like, okay, well, let's eliminate that as a possibility and always do small body, big head. So you're not pandering to anyone. You're not condescending to anyone by not including that. You're just saying, hey, this is my established style. And then you have weird ears, bro, is like the content of that. I really like that. Like any sort of, and this is what I mean by like, it's sort of what I was getting at with like opt-in content stuff, because like we kind of live in a in a weird space because people don't often get to opt in to satire. And what I mean by that is like TikTok and YouTube shorts and stuff, right? There's no, hey, heads up, here's what this thing is about. Do you want to watch this? Yes, no.
There's no video description.
Yeah, a video description, and or like in YouTube Shorts' case, you just keep scrolling. And like there's no, you might get a title. You might notice the title. And that's not enough of an opt-in system for people to like not be surprised by someone saying something really wild. And like that really sucks. Like in the example you gave of like cartoonist, someone literally paid you to do this. Like that is the biggest form of opt-in. Like they no longer get to be upset about what you create. There's that like mentioned thing. And also you sought out a cartoonist to be satirized. So it's like you are giving 100% opt-in there, and then you get what you pay for. But like someone who just randomly stumbles upon like trans jokes on YouTube Shorts, they didn't get to consent to that.
Yeah.
Like that took them by complete surprise. And like that's the sort of shit that like is not okay. Like satirizing that stuff is like there's a safe way to do all this. Like it's been invented. Anyway, like it's just like an odd thing where like that's sort of what we get at when we go, hey, don't punch up. Always punch up, don't punch down. Because like the same thing goes with conflict and being empathetic. It's just basic empathy. Like if someone is in a situation where you feel like they're more sensitive, don't make fun of them.
Yeah, and there's
like it is really basic.
Yeah, and there's kind of a recent example of this as well. At least recent to the date of recording, although by the time this is out, this will probably have long been over. The Titan submersible. When it was going down and people were looking for it, I mean, I know I made jokes about it, and most of my friends did because we're all engineers, and the whole thing's kind of stupid from an engineering design standpoint. And then when it was confirmed that died,
this is such a great example.
People stopped for a bit.
Yeah.
Well, right now Russia's being made fun of with the whole Prigozhin deal, and probably in a few more days, the submarine jokes are going to come back. I've seen a lot more after the confirmation of death, a lot more discussions on beyond just satirizing to kind of show how stupid it all was, but actual discussions of, from an engineering standpoint, here's why it was stupid. You never want to do a cylinder versus a sphere, talking about the differences in design against others. And actually something I saw that was really commonly mocked was the game controller. And
yeah, the game controller is industry standard, though.
That's like not that uncommon.
Yeah, it's not that uncommon. It is weird, but it's not.
We have a whole term for it. COTS, commercial off the shelf. I actually just did a major engineering design project over the last year, and we ended up going, it's just better for a lot of this stuff to just buy it off the shelf than do it yourself. It's not worth the hassle. It's not worth the pain in the ass. It's not worth the facilities. Because, I mean, if you gave us another year, 2 years, and several $100,000, oh yeah, we could do it for you. But who the fuck's giving that to college juniors?
Yeah. The one thing I want to touch about the submarine thing, the submersible, just because like it is exactly what I'm talking about, like illustrative, and I thank you for bringing that example up. The point at which I decided, or like the point at which I realized it was okay to make fun of, is when I heard it's $250,000 a pop, like $250,000 to go down there each. At that point, it's like, okay, these are rich people. Like these are people who can afford $250,000 to go diving. There is one person on that 5-person submersible that I wouldn't touch, and that's the 19-year-old who likely was living at home, didn't totally have the ability to say no when your father says you're going with me. Like I think there's probably like familial stuff that
almost certainly
forced him into it. I don't know him, don't know his situation, but that's usually how family stuff operates.
And also, it's a kid.
But the other 4, also he had his whole life ahead of him. That's sad. That's a tragedy. The other 4 Yuhus who paid to go down there, including like the biggest one was like the CEO,
yeah.
who has a litany of all these big talks. And this is the sort of thing where it's like it is low hanging fruit, but not in terms of like a punching down thing, in terms of like this is really easy, because the guy talked about how immortal he is, like for the entire run up to the Titan going down. And it was just like, oh man, this all aged like, damn.
Yeah, there's also
like not well.
There's a phrase in engineering. It's one I've come across many times, and it's one I'm actually really fond of. And it's regulations are written in blood. Every single industry, new rules are made because someone died. That's what has to happen to change the rules sometimes. That's what changed the engineering design processes. That's why incidents like the Challenger, incidents like the Hyatt Regency Hotel, I believe it was, changed how we design and how we mandate things for engineers today, because the mistakes then killed people. Choices that were made that put profit or that put expediency over safety killed people, and that's what happened with the submarine. Expediency and profit were put over safety, and it killed people.
Yep, and that deserves to be like, listen, that deserves to be made fun of. Like, that deserves to be called out, and satirization has always been about calling like things like this out. There was a tweet I saw going around that made me laugh. I don't totally agree with it, but the tweet was essentially, if you can't laugh at this, you're not ready for revolution. And that I agree with the sentiment, not the text. There is some tragic parts to this. There's a dark story behind this, but however, there is also something objectively funny about a bunch of billionaires shoving themselves in a cylinder to go see a ship we know everything about already. Like, that is pretty indicative of how the uber rich spend their time.
There's also the irony of the rich person's vessel thought to be impossible to sinks. Rich person vessel goes to look at the thing, is claimed to be invincible, and also then sinks.
Shares some of its name. Like, Maya, you can't make that up.
Yeah,
like I'm jealous.
The name
of
sharing was
like, from a writing standpoint. I'm like, I wish I thought of
this.
This is, you can't make this up.
Yeah, this is some crazy shit, because I mean, the dude's name is like Stockton Rush, and some of the shit he says, he sounds like...
Yeah, Stockton Rush, that's right. What a great rich person name. Holy God.
That sounds like those... what's the rich man in Team Fortress 2?
Oh, God. Yeah,
Same fucking energy as that.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about, though, right?
Oh, my God.
It's this absurd, adventure crazy, manly man, rich dude who's all about doing these things and pushing these boundaries. And they're boundaries that don't need to be pushed and really shouldn't be pushed for safe innovation.
Saxton Hale is his name. Yeah, Saxton
That's
Hale.
the name. I was not going to remember that otherwise. For the folks listening who aren't familiar with Team Fortress 2, I really encourage you to look up the lore and look up the comics, because they're hilarious. Just off the wall.
Yeah, what's great about Valve, specifically early Valve, is they are so damn funny. Like, their comedic writers on from Team Fortress 2, like, including their press releases about it, for a while their updates, they had this parody thing every April 1st where something weird would happen. And like, speaking about like parody and satirization, they would be like parodying a dev blog, except for it'd be from the perspective of a person who didn't get the whole hat thing, and like would go, like, he created a perfectly balanced 10th character that got scrapped because everyone didn't like his hats. And then they had a hat show, and then it goes into incredible detail about everybody's hats and the winner of them. And like, it was just like a parody of a day in the life, like dev blog stuff, which happened quite a bit back then. Like, you'd be able to get access to devs in early internet that, like, now I think they protect themselves a little bit better when it comes to like major conglomerates like Valve. But
honestly, that's probably for the best.
Yeah, well, it is probably for the best. Yeah. Especially the whole think tank culture over there. But anyway, as another aside, it is kind of funny sometimes when I think about like, wow, there is nothing I can talk about that does not have an asterisk on it, but there's also this horrible thing, you know, like you have to actively like seek ways to enjoy things despite it. Like I'm a big movie guy, like love watching movies. And most of the time I go into every project being like, so the director's probably a piece of shit, but we're just going to ignore that and watch a movie. And then if I really, really feel like punching myself later, I'll look up like what the director did.
Oh boy.
Yeah. But like, anyways, yeah, but so like the other thing that I'll always say is that one of the things that is the safest, but it's the hardest to pull off, I think, is self-parody. Because it requires an establishment of a pattern that the audience gets and comments on, right? Like you have to have kind of audience engagement in order for them to fully engage with the self-parody. I've managed it exactly one time during like I have a 330,000 plus piece of writing.
37, I believe.
Yeah, a very long fanfic in the Arcane fandom, where I established a phrase over and over and over again throughout the entire run, and then one chapter I had it come up like 5 times, like over and over and over again.
Oh gosh, I remember that.
Yeah, and it was just like a moment of like self-parody where it's just like, okay, I've done this for 25 chapters. The audience expects a certain thing. Now I'm going to subvert the expectation by being like, here's the title over and over and over again. Cutting.
It also serves as a bit of a filter for the folks who kind of take the wrong way with fics, having fun with it.
Yeah, I think like, well, fanfic writing in general is a weird space of artistic creativity where people come in with their own baggage and put that on you in ways that I don't think they do with commercial authors. And so, which is why it's hard to be funny in writing specifically. There's a mental block there because I think that we as like a crew, as like a society crew, I don't know why I'm calling like the human race a crew, but me and the gals and pals, rolling on up to read a book. But no, like I think comedy, we're used to comedy being spoken word, we're used to comedy being like physical and seeing it. But writing comedically, writing something that's funny is very, very hard, I think. And it's hard to be funny because, first of all, the audience knows that you're trying to be funny. When you write a comedy book, they expect to laugh. That puts a weight of expectation on something that isn't that doesn't like conduce itself to fucking like a fun audience experience where you can just kind of like laugh. Like it's the same sort of thing as your friend being
it's
like,
hard because part of what makes things funny is a subversion of expectations, and if you're expecting a subversion of expectations, it gets a little weird there.
Yeah, well, it's the same sort of thing where I think that a friend of yours saying, "Oh man, you're going to be shocked," you'll be less shocked now. It's the same deal where it's like, I'm funny, and it's like, okay, well, do something funny, make me laugh, is like the expectation. Yeah. So I always try to aim for, especially with comedy, I always try to do it in things where like that's not the main point. Like there's gonna be funny shit all throughout it, but for the most part it's like a straightforward romance or whatever. And the key things there is like, for instance, making a super rich person not know how to turn the sent from my iPhone feature off. Like that's very funny every time it pops up. Like just a very short thing about like just like this defines in one sentence that this person is awful with technology.
Yes, that's kind of the way I approach comedy in my works as well. Is I don't set out to be funny necessarily. I don't tell you from the outset, aside from the tags, that there's going to be funny shit here. But I don't write comedies. I write stories, and then I put in funny jokes that make me laugh.
Yeah, that's truly it. Like for writing stuff, I think like the key thing is like make yourself laugh, and if no one else gets it, well, at least you got a chuckle from you, the real audience.
Yeah, there's 7 billion people on this earth. Actually, I think we're closer to 8 now than 7, so I should round up and say 8. But
Yay.
I digress. There's gonna be someone else out there who laughs at the things that make you laugh.
Yep.
Like that's just gonna happen, statistically speaking.
And that's probably your platonic soulmate. So hold on to them and never let them go. Don't let them out of your sight. Keep them in the cage overnight if you have to.
Break out the sledgehammer and the wood block if you have to.
That's right. That's right. That you don't get to leave. You're here because you laugh at my jokes, and this is a healthy relationship. That's what you say to them over and over and over again. Yeah, like I love both of these topics so dearly, like parody and satire. Like my favorite movie of all time, Airplane. I'm not saying everything in Airplane has aged the best, but it like has like a laugh a minute, and it's a very clear parody of a whole bunch of things. Like it slaps them all in. It's like it's like the time capsule of cinema up until that point. And one of my favorite ones is like the movie is about an airplane that, well, ostensibly it's about an airplane that has a malfunction and has trouble landing. That's the entire plot. But in there's a recurring character that keeps saying like, it was the wrong day to quit smoking, or and then that starts to ramp up to,
I sure picked a bad week to quit sniffing glue.
Exactly. Like the joke starts to like roll forwards, and it becomes like a thing of like, it's the gritty, I'm too old for this shit guy, but his vices are getting incredibly worse as they go.
I think my favorite joke, well, my next favorite joke after that one from Airplane is the protagonist's drinking problem.
Oh yeah, where he throws. He can't put it in his mouth.
He can't put water in his mouth. Every time he lifts the cup, he starts shaking and pours it all over himself. He literally has a physical problem drinking.
The other really good one that like this is what it all is rolling to a later point, but the other thing that I really like about Airplane specifically is I just want you to know that I'm very proud and we're all rooting for you, which the character does 3 different times at more and more inappropriate moments. And like, so what parody essentially is we've taken the structure of the thing and the innards, we've spread them out on a table and figured out what works about this, right? They're like, okay, so here are the basic structure of how this works. Now we're going to assemble it all together in the wrong order, make everything shifted to the left, and then we're going to do constant escalation. So most parodies, Scary Movie is another example of this. Not a great parody, but at the time, no one was doing this. Where it's like every joke has the shape of a horror movie plus escalation. Like all it is just making these moments bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And ideally, at the end of that escalation, you get a laugh, and then you just kind of can move on to the next bit. But like satire, in contrast to that, is going incredibly deep on one specific point of view. A really good example of this for video game nerds is No Man's Sky. The release of No Man's Sky, which disappointed everybody and prompted like 45 to 50 video essays all screaming about how it wasn't what they wanted. Then H-Bomber Guy released a video that is a legitimate critique and review, but with him yelling the entire time. So it's him basically being like, hey guys, this is incredibly stupid the way that you guys present this as like I'm angry man, I'm going to be shouting at 300 decibels the entire video. So I'm going to do the same thing except talk about why the game works and why it doesn't for 12 minutes. And it's unwatchable. Like it is absolutely unwatchable. Like I love H-Bomber Guy. I cannot stand that video, and I think that's the point. The point is that like this is a bad way to present your argument. It's a bad way to present to an audience, and it's an awful way of getting your information across. Stop it. Was his entire
satire is like it's critique.
Yeah, it's critique by doing the thing you're doing, essentially. Yeah, like the SNL sketches of Donald Trump are very good. They're satirization for sure. Right? Their quality is incredibly suspect day to day, but the satirization of just like, I'm gonna say what you said just back to you but dumber. Like when you say man I'm hungry, your friend goes man I'm hungry, that's satirization. It's just not good.
Or hi, hungry, I'm dead.
Yeah, that is that is
what my friends are more likely to say to me.
Yeah, I guess that is also satirization, because you're just like, haha, I'm taking your thing and throwing it back at you.
Grammar.
Yeah, exactly. Grammar, yeah. But like, what's I find really fascinating about parody, satirization, all that stuff, is that in written works, it's difficult to discuss ones that work. I think we have plenty for movies, for podcasts, for movies, podcasts, video and audio, visuals in general. But like, the written word is weird because
it's hard.
Well, in order to satirize something that's written word, you need to first like write it, and like the things that you're most likely to satirize as written word is other written works. So it's like you're just sort of like, okay, how do I sustain this for fucking like 150 pages? Like it's like, this is why like The Onion exists, because it's short and quick. Right? It's like,
yeah, you make the joke, you get out of there.
The headline is sometimes the entire Onion article, and that's fine. Like, all the way back to the submersible, the headline, sending another group of billionaires after the first group of billionaires. That headline is very funny. But like, you don't need to have the article at that point. That's the joke. The joke has been told, and you just get out.
Yes.
But like doing a satirical novel or satirical like 10K plus, I actually, as I'm talking about this, like I want to try doing this now. But like,
you gotta try it.
Yeah, I don't know how well it'll go, but I can definitely try it alone, write it, and be like, yeah, this is bad, and then never tell anyone. I've done that with so many things. You type something out, you look at it, you're like, oh god, and then you just like save it, close it, and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, there's a bunch of things where I'm like, this is gonna be great, and then I'm like, why did I think this was a good idea? What crack was I smoking?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of works in my drive that'll never see the work of day because they're not good.
I think, yeah, like that's just part of the creative process, like scrapping stuff. Like I remember every time I finish something, I'm like, I feel like I left something on the table, and that's sort of the feeling you want.
Yeah.
Versus like,
you gotta leave stuff behind.
I was out of gas on that one. It was like, there's 3 more chapters. Ooh, gotta fight through this.
Yeah, that's a lot of that agrees a lot with my personal approach to the creative process. Is you aren't trying to cram stuff in.
Mm-hmm.
You want to trim it down to its bare bones and just put out what has to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I'll also say about satire and parody with regard to like when to do either, because like we've talked a lot about how punching down is inappropriate, punching up is okay, and we talked a lot about how like being in communities and steepled within them allows for better parodies of those communities without offense, because you get the nuances of how those communities and cultures and segregated groups of society like interact. But like when it comes to like if you're sitting there thinking like, is this appropriate? The best way to describe the process of it is like, interrogate the person in you who is wanting to do this and the whys of that. I'm sorry for all the personal examples, because I do parody a lot and satire a lot, but there's a tweet that it used to exist that was incredibly misogynistic. And it started with a character being like, "Hey, want to hear a joke?" And it was just like, "Yeah, but you're only popular because of your cup size." Essentially, was the joke, and it's not very funny. And so my immediate response was to quote tweet it and say, "Hey, do you want to hear a joke?" And the second character saying, "Is it funny?" And the first character saying, "No," and that's the entire tweet. And in that moment, it's like, the reason I did that, and before sending tweet, I'm like, why am I doing this? And the answer was because it was like, this is gross and sexist and weird that you've done this. It was another sort of thing where just kind of like, you're not in the community that is allowed to make jokes like this. Like it was like an outsider, in the sense of like, it was a straight white dude trying to make a joke about like cup size or whatever. And it's just sort of like this really isn't your place. Like if you haven't spent a ton of time around like female only society stuff, like you can hear their jokes about cup size are funny. That's the difference between their jokes and our jokes about it. Like my jokes specifically about it. Like, because I don't know how to make a good bra joke because I've never had to wear one for an extended period of time. But like my wife kills with it. Absolutely kills with it because she's fucking spent time with it. It's just that it really is that simple. Like, so satirizing that was just sort of like you need to take this down. Like, I think you need to delete this tweet in a bad way. So like, that's sort of like interrogate that side of you that's going like, is it appropriate for me to be making this joke? And why am I making this joke? And if the reason is just to be funny, that's actually not that good of a reason for satire specifically. Like usually there is a intent behind it. And if it is just I want to make this one person in my life laugh, then maybe share it with that one person instead of going global with it. And if you don't care about hurting people, then you won't do the step anyways. So I'm not even talking to you, right? Like that's the other side of it. It's just like the folks who make jokes like this that are hurtful. And people say, I can't believe that you decided to do that. It's like, well, they didn't even really go through the decision-making process. They just sent it because they don't give a shit. Like, because they're that rotten. Like,
if you don't care about hurting people, I'm surprised you made it 40 minutes into this episode, let alone through the previous episode. And if you've been listening for a while, how in the hell did you make it through the entire first season?
Oh, we lost a lot of them during the punch down, punch up segment. Like they dipped. But yeah, it's so like when is each appropriate is just like parodies. I honestly think that like parodies are like love letters in a lot of ways too. Like usually they're from people who deeply understand the source material and are like, I'm going to lambast. Like Spaceballs is like a love letter to Star Wars as much as it is making fun of Star Wars. And like, so like that sort of stuff is just sort of like, you are clearly a huge dork about this. Like, go off, like sing your song, sing it with your chest. But like for satire, there's a lot more care that needs to be put into it. And most of it is just like literally just asking yourself, hey, yo, why are you up to this? And if the answer is because I think it'll be funny, like in some instances that's okay, but like you do need to figure out why the urge is to make that joke. And if the reason why is like, oh, because I have deep-seated phobias against certain like cultures, classes, religions, sexes, then it's like, okay, well, don't do that then. Like, don't stop. Release the left click button.
Yeah, get off of Reddit, get off of 4chan.
Yeah.
Take a breath.
Yeah, well, mostly the take a breath stuff. I think most of conflict boils down to like not interrogating the self in terms of like, why are you making these decisions?
Yeah, there was an incident that is this episode, the previous episode are both very relevant to in a server that I moderate, where it was just kind of a person in question didn't really even think that what they were doing could hurt people, and that even if it did, those people deserved that hurt anyways.
Yeah, that's an incredibly hard line to walk. But they deserve it is okay. So like the real reason why you punch up and not down, right? The real reason that you punch up and not down is that the did they deserve it kind of becomes yes, and who cares, right? Like if you're taking pot shots at a world leader or or a billionaire man baby who bans the word cisgender, for instance, like if you are targeting those people and like the do they deserve this thing is like, well, yeah, like, yes, they do. They also, who cares? Like but like if you're doing a thing where you're like, oh, but this blanket group of people deserve to be hurt anyways, so shrug aspect of it is just like, I don't dig that, man. Like, I don't vibe with that. Like it truly is the difference of context of like, what is the group that you're targeting in relation to you, and then in relation to the world. Like, I think that it's an incredibly, there's an ocean of difference between, men really do be like blank versus like trans girls really do be like blank. Like, there's an ocean of difference between those two statements. And
there's a lot of difference. It's also, it depends on who's making that joke, because both of those can be really, really awful.
Yes, exactly. Like, I'm speaking from like my perspective. Like, if I were to just start talking about like trans girls or whatever, there would be eyebrows raised, because like, I'm not one. And
I mean, if you made like a Fallout New Vegas joke, I'd probably laugh.
Okay, there is a thing with Fallout New Vegas, though. Like, that's real, right? Like, that is
it is a very funny pattern.
It is very real.
What's probably my favorite part about all of it is that my friend, who is biggest on Fallout New Vegas, big enough that because of Fallout New Vegas, he wrote an entire D&D campaign set in the Fallout universe, set in the city that we all grew up in. And we played it for at least like a year or two, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Completely cis. There's no, like, he's done the gender questions. There's no question about it. And so it is definitely a bit of a stereotype, along with the CS and the programming and the thigh highs.
Thigh highs, yeah. Like, I'm so fortunate that when I was 22, I met a trans, like, at the top I mentioned being in queer spaces for 10 years, and my gateway person to that was this woman named Elena, who actually got her Canadian visa recently and is going to be living in Ontario, which, like, we might actually get to hang out in person a lot more, which I'm very excited about. But yeah.
Oh wow, big congratulations.
Yeah, she's stoked. I met her on a role play site, and she was the first trans person that I had ever talked to, and like gotten personal access to, like, not in like public or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was the start of like several barriers that I had to break through in terms of like, just like, as a, again, white appearing cis dude. I had a lot of like privileges stuff that I had to re-examine, and she was like the first person to do that. And she was currently playing, I believe she was either currently playing or then went on to play Fallout New Vegas, like somewhere in that first year of meeting. And it was just like a moment of like, oh, stuff from her, where like, that's where I first heard that joke. And I was like, wow, that's an old joke, and it's a good joke. But it is absolutely, you're right, it is a stereotype. It does depend on who's making it, but
yeah, it's kind of funny, because for me, the first time I had contact with a trans person was someone who I later invited onto the first podcast I did, on one of the first episodes, where I was actually kind of in charge of that, actually. Mm-hmm. And that directly led to me cracking my egg and realizing a lot of things about my own gender.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the other thing too is just like the questioning stuff, like questioning self, like interrogating the self. If there's one thing that, hey, people listening at home, hey, hi, it's me, Badger. Interrogate the self. Ask yourself questions. And I'm not even like, we can narrow it down to why that's a good idea in so many different categories, but just generally just talk to yourself. Like, talk to yourself, figure out why you think the way you do about some stuff. It'll make you funnier. It'll make you a better writer. It'll make you a better fandom participant. It'll make you a less toxic person to be around. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain to ask yourselves, why am I feeling this way? And if you don't know how to ask yourself, why am I feeling that way? Find out. There's lots of resources online that you can look for that are just pertinent questions to ask the self. And it'll like, I guarantee you it'll help you become better at conflict management. It'll make you feel better about avoidancy and avoiding conflict with people. It'll help with your diplomacy in terms of like, I feel statements. Like, it'll make you feel more in touch with yourself when you're talking to people. A lot of people talk about charisma as if you can't help your charisma, and to certain degrees you can't. But the one thing that you can do is just get better at talking. about yourself. And the best way to do that is to go to the source, which is you. So if you're ever feeling like this didn't make me feel good and I'm feeling a way, and I know the instinct is to immediately react, right? Like everyone wants to just react immediately. It does help everyone to just take a beat and think like, why am I reacting this way? And then if you get so good at it that your first reaction, that kick, will be the one that's most true to yourself. Anyway, that's my little 2-bit, but like ask yourselves questions. You might crack your egg like Maya does and go through a big change and things change for you. And we love to see that, but it might just be as simple as like, but my parents and religion made me misogynistic, and I need to work on that. Like, and that was the big thing for me. It was just like the discomfort around homosexuality turned into latent bisexuality. And I am much happier as a bi dude than I ever was as a straight man. So like, it always helps to just look into yourself a little bit. Don't be scared of that person. That person's your friend. They've been there since you were born. Anyway, Maya, once again, lead us back from the darkness of this podcast.
The ADHD talking hour, everyone. One thing that I want to talk about, and this is going to be a bit of a hard transition because, ouchie, is transformative works and how they tie into this. Because you may have guessed this from the title of the episode, but we here at the Fanfiction Tapes are very familiar with Archive of Our Own. Mm-hmm. And the organization that supports AO3 is called the Organization of Transformative Works. There's a reason for that. And some of this is going to bring up US-specific law. Laws are different everywhere generally. But parody and fan fiction in the US are actually legally like cousins, if not outright siblings. And like how they're protected. Things are actually, I believe, very different in the UK, where if you call J.K. Rowling a TERF, you can complain to the government and get you arrested. Good thing we don't have to follow that.
J.K. Rowling's a TERF, just in case it wasn't clear.
Yes.
That is the belief that I hold personally. And it happens to be true, which is handy. Anyway, sorry, go on, Maya.
Whether there are these works that you take something that's already out there in the world. Someone else has already gone to the effort of making Arcane. And you go, okay, that's cool, but what if I did this? And you change substantial things about the work. And parody's doing that same thing. Right? In fanfiction, you go, okay, well, what if Vi and Caitlin met when they were like 5 and they became best friends? And, all this terrible shit was kind of avoided because people could talk to each other. Communication, shocker. That's a pretty classic fanfic prompt, but you also, Badger mentioned Spaceballs earlier. Parodying, it's very, very clearly taking heavily ideas and plot from Star Wars, but it's making fun of a lot of what Star Wars did. I actually haven't seen Spaceballs yet. I've been meaning to. I have it on my watch list. I just need to get around to it.
It's Mel Brooks, and that's good and bad. So it is a very Mel Brooks movie. It's not the most Mel Brooks movie, but it's up there.
Yeah, it's all about taking stuff that's out there in the world and playing with it. And there's legal protections for that. Part of that is actually the result of AO3 and the Organization of Transformative Works. That's kind of one of the cool things that allows this podcast to be out there, is because we are talking about books we've read, shows we've watched, movies we've watched, podcasts we've listened to. Actually, I don't think we've mentioned podcasts very much on this show.
I've got a couple now under my belt that I can actually talk about. But yeah, like it's an unmined ore vein of podcast narrative stuff. I didn't realize it existed until a friend of mine, a young ghost, was like, you should listen to this, and I did, and I was like, wow, this bangs. I can't believe I've never done this before. Anyway, sorry, go on.
I didn't listen to podcasts much before doing this podcast myself, and a couple of weeks ago in the kitchen I started listening to Dimension 20, which is very, very funny. A lot of politically apt jokes in it. I love the halflings.
The cubbies.
Yes, they're hilarious. I don't know where I was going with this. The ADHD talking hour, folks.
I do think that like transformative works as so like my big thing right now is writing fan fiction. So I obviously feel very very strongly about transformative works and how parodies do rise above the original works because they change them foundationally. And it's so good when a parody, like I think that's the mark of like a truly good parody, is when they hit the marks so well that they work on their own as an example of what they're parodying, right? Like the Spaceballs is the running example, but like Spaceballs works on its own as a sci-fi movie while parodying operatic sci-fi movies. In many ways, The Princess Bride is a parody of these fantasy stories with like the princess and the knight, while being an example of all of them. So you have jokes about ROUSs as well as like a genuinely at times touching love story. And if you just chart for The Princess Bride, it hits the hero's journey pretty well on the mark in terms of just like a little medieval fantasy story. But yeah, like I think that's the mark of a true parody, is when it becomes like a truly good parody, is when it becomes transformative. Like none of us are going to sit here and say, "Oh man, the Scary Movie movies, they really worked as horrors," because they didn't, and they never will. The entire time you're watching that, you're like, "This is a parody."
Cabin in the Woods is also a parody of horror.
Cabin in the Woods is the absolute golden example of like a parody horror movie, because it's funny.
That's one of the only horror movies I've actually seen.
Yeah, like it's funny, but it's also just very clearly taking the piss, and but also like is a horror movie. Like it's legitimately, it follows the horror movie very faithfully. And while the in-universe trying to make fun of all these tropes and little hang-ups that horror movies have. So yeah, like I think parody is weird in that sense. They're just like when it truly becomes transformative, that's when it works best. Like that's when it's cooking with gas.
Yes. And actually, kind of speaking of parody, there's this weird, almost, I don't quite want to say subgenre, but like weird parody type thing that's unique to fanfiction. I don't really see it, I think, anywhere else. And it's called crack. Spelled like the drug for our listeners who haven't done any fanfiction reading at Mom and Dad. It's absurd. It is often drawn to be bizarre, absurdism in the extreme. And sometimes with some of it, there's a series that actually a friend of mine does for the Ruby fandom that is a parody of bad fanfiction style. It's crack. There's a blatant author self-insert, there's bad grammar, there's intentional formatting errors, but it's also there to have a good time. It's not there to be mean. And that's one of the unique things that I really like about fanfiction, is you could just have bizarre, out there stories that are just, you're there, you're having fun.
Yeah. I think crack is weird. And I'm going to go ahead and, state my biases at the top here. Like, I'm not the biggest crack fan. That goes for the drug as well as the fanfic thing. Didn't care for it. But the crack enters into that thing we were talking about before, where it sets an expectation when you tag something as crack. Because like the really bad crack is look at like that sort of like goofiness.
Yeah, it's haha so funny.
Yeah, random. it's raw XD levels of. I just totally came to everyone who uses raw. If you use raw XD unironically, you're valid and I love you. I just want to say, I'm more speaking, I guess, to the culture of randomness that invaded my Facebook feed from 2005 to 2010, when Fallout New Vegas was released, and we all heard around the nation. Anyway, but the like crack I've never been a huge fan of, but that said, there has been two I can think of that legitimately made me laugh. And they were both things that like entered at an 11 out of 10 and just rose to 15. And like like there's also like subtle versions of crack where like, hey, what if this is a very specific example, but it also happens to be very good fic. Hey, what if Vi invited Caitlin to a D&D session, but Caitlin thought it was a BDSM session? And like it is legitimately so uncomfortable, so cringy, so excellent. It's like the best version of crack for me, where it's like, this is crack. It's crazy that this happened, but everyone everyone buy into my universe right now because it's silly, and then we can make some fun. And it like really hits that cringe comedy element of it. Like it is not for everyone, because a lot of people just like crawl out of their skin during the misunderstanding part of it, which is super valid, because it's real wrong.
I would probably crawl straight out of my skin.
It's real
because I get major secondhand anxiety anytime anyone in a show is like. There's a lot of kids shows where like I won't be able to watch episodes like Avatar, She-Ra. There's episodes of those shows that I can't really rewatch because I have to leave the room if the episode is on. I get so much social anxiety.
Yeah, well, there's something about your main character being uncomfortable that as an audience member, you're like, I know why you're doing this as a writer, but I'd love it for you to stop.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, like that's the sort of crack that I love. And it's like this more subtle crack, I guess, where it's like the crack part of it is that this is clearly a ridiculous misunderstanding. And then the story gets mined from that premise.
There's an arcade one I'm going to have to send you. I don't know if you'll find it funny. I find it funny because I'm an engineer. Engineering major, but semantics for the purposes of joke. I find it fucking hilarious because it's these absurd situations of what the fuck. But it doesn't quite lean into some of that stuff about crack that can be uncomfortable, which is why I like it and why I've gone back and read it like 20 times.
Yeah, like the other one, real quick before we move on, the other one that I really, really enjoy is Vi is a toxic gamer and Caitlin is a stream girl. And like that is the entire fic. Like it doesn't go any deeper. And it's just stuff like that where just like, yeah, hey, so I'm gonna go ahead and do my thing here. I need you guys to like clear the runway and let me cook. And once a fanfic author does that, like I'm about to start cooking, and like me as a reader, I'm like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm along for the ride or whatever. Like I don't want to get off Mr. Bones' wild ride, and like that's the sort of thing where it's like that's what crack can do. Crack can be like Mr. Bones' wild ride, get on or get out. God, I love crack. I also don't like crack very much. It's a weird thing. I'm glad it exists, is my thing. Like, I'm glad it exists, and people out here are speaking their truth. As an audience member, 9 times out of 10, it's not for me.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's both great and terrible about the open nature of fan fiction.
Yeah.
The low barrier to publishing means some really great stuff that just would not do well going through traditional methods that, CEOs would see that and go, fuck that noise. That stuff can get through and really, really shine. But also it means there's a lot of stuff that some of the filters of traditional publishing keep out and are good to keep out because it's not fun.
Yeah, like fan fiction, this is going to be a whole diatribe on fan fiction that it might be worth doing a whole like episode about it. But like the idea of fan fiction being both for the reader and the author is very important, because it occupies a space for both, and both get ideas and both get like positive feedback from it. It is pure expression and pure creation in its best form, because no one's doing it for anything other than the want to create. So you get people who get their fix off of reading fic that they didn't quite get their fix from reading the original work. and you get people who want to express themselves creatively, don't really have an outlet. Publishing is hard, so they go to, I'm gonna make my Blorbos kiss. And like there's something beautiful and like simple about that, and I would never ever say to someone like, you can't create your truth because I don't like it. Like that's never something that I'm going to take a position on. Now like there is nuance here for like some, like it gets into the murky waters of headcanon, and I'm not really interested in like going over all that unless we have like a lot of time. But
that would be a whole episode on
it would be
itself.
like 3 parts because there's a lot to say on the topic of headcanon.
There's a lot of mess there,
it's incredibly simple, and it's also incredibly complicated, just like humans. But yeah, like it's the point I'm kind of driving at here is that fan fiction scratches an itch that you kind of can't get anywhere else. And like there was a comment that I read once where it was like, sometimes alternate universe fanfic is just contemporary queer romance in which characters you already have a relationship continue to have a relationship. And like that's the key, where it's like you already have a relationship with these characters, you already like them, you already like what they do, and that just continues. You just get more of that. Which is why like it is genuinely insane when people try to kill it. Because it's like you realize this is just more engagement. Like we like the thing you did so much, we want to do more of it, and for free. Like the for free thing is like the underscored. Like none of us are getting anything out of this, unless you're God.
Yeah.
In which case your Patreon's probably full up. Like, so anyway, yeah.
Well, we are quite a bit over time, actually, and there was a little bit more we wanted to get to, but I also have to get to D&D.
Fair enough.
Ian, have we gotten anything new in the mailbag in the last hour or so since we checked?
No, that is still empty. So if anybody wants to write us a nice letter, you can email that to us. Our address is fanfictapes@gmail.com. I'll also make sure to put that in the description so that people know how exactly that is spelled, and maybe it'll format into a link you can click. I believe we also have a Twitter. Yes, Maya?
Yes, we are at fanfictiontapes on Twitter. Nobody sent us anything yet, but if there's something you want us to read on the show and you don't want to email it to us and prefer Twitter for some strange reason, I mean, you do you, but if you prefer it, we're on there as well. Send us stuff. We'll be sure to put it on air if you want, or just keep it off if you'd rather keep it private and just send us something.
And of course, you can also leave us a comment on our YouTube channel or leave us a rating and review on whatever podcast service you use to listen to this.
Hell yeah.
I am and have always been Maya. I was joined by...
I'm Badger. I'm not sorry anymore. Dylan isn't here to apologize to again. Next time I'm on and Dylan's here, I will continue to be sorry. But for now, I'm still Badger.
And I'm Ian. Until next time, bye.
Later days.